She is still breathing, unfortunately. Those words spoken by my father while I lay in a coma hit harder than any physical blow. Standing there, he didn't sound sad. He sounded irritated. His voice, cold and calculating, cut through the sterile air of the hospital room. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could hear it all. His betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. To him, I was no longer a daughter, just a line item in a ledger. And that's when I realized the truth in his eyes. I wasn't worth keeping alive. He was calculating his gain. It wasn't about love or even loss. It was all business. Have you ever trusted someone with your life only to find they were holding the knife? A friend, a family member, maybe even someone you loved. The sting of betrayal leaves scars deeper than any physical wound. It's a cold, cruel truth we all face at some point. The ones closest to you can sometimes hurt you the most. I was trapped in my own body. Every part of me was paralyzed, but my mind, it was working at a pace so fast I could feel the heat of it behind my closed eyelids. I was locked in a state of forced silence, forced stillness, but inside I was anything but calm. I could hear everything, every movement, every whispered conversation, every breath in that cold, sterile room. My father had left no room for ambiguity. The moment the doctor stepped out of the room, his act of being the grieving father evaporated like fog in the morning sun. He was already thinking ahead. I could hear him whispering, but it wasn't the kind of whisper you use when you want to be kind or gentle. No, this was the whisper of a man who had already written me off as expendable. His voice, tight with desperation, spoke plainly. He wanted to pull the plug. Not because I was a beloved daughter, but because I had become a financial liability, a cost he could no longer afford. His words were sharp, calculating. He was angry that I was still alive, not because of any sense of love or care, but because my existence was eating away at his resources. For him, I was just another number on a spreadsheet, a debt that needed to be erased. He was making a decision about me, but it wasn't a decision based on family or emotion or love. It was based on profit. He wanted to let me go so he could collect on my life insurance, $2.5 million. The numbers in his head were dancing, and I could almost hear them, the cruel calculation of what was more profitable, keeping me alive or cutting me off. To him, the math was simple. My survival was a drain on his bank account and death. Well, death could settle a lot of his debts. He had always been good with numbers. But I was too. I had spent years mastering the art of tracking money, following paper trails, watching the flow of funds from one pocket to another, from one company to the next. As a forensic auditor, I had spent the last decade hunting criminals, uncovering shell companies, hidden offshore accounts, and dark money flowing through the cracks of the system. I knew how to look past the lies and see the truth. And in this moment, that skill became my lifeline. My father wasn't just a man trying to collect an insurance payout. He was a man on the verge of making a massive mistake. I knew it, and I knew I couldn't show him just how much I knew. The stakes had never been higher. I had to survive long enough to expose him. I had to stay alive, stay conscious, just long enough to make sure he slipped up. If he believed I was already gone, if he thought I was nothing more than a shell, an empty body waiting to be buried, then he would let his guard down. I couldn't give him the satisfaction of thinking he had won. Not yet. Not when everything was so close. I could hear the scuff of his leather shoes on the floor, the sound of him pacing back and forth like a man trying to decide if he was going to step off a cliff or keep looking for a way to climb higher. His anger, his frustration, every emotion he felt wasn't directed at losing his daughter, but at losing his chance to cash in. I could almost smell the familiar scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and stale scotch as he came closer, his voice growing more desperate. His plan wasn't working as smoothly as he had hoped. The doctor had signed the paperwork, but the real issue was the waiting game. The insurance payout wasn't immediate, and he needed me to be legally dead to collect. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about control. My father had always been a man who believed he could control everything, finances, people, even me. But I was smarter than he thought. I had been trained in deception, in the art of spotting lies. I could hear the lie in his voice as he talked on the phone to Marco, the man he owed money to. I could hear the desperation. He didn't just want to get away with it, he needed to. And that need was his undoing. That's when I knew I had to make him slip up. I had to survive long enough for him to make a mistake that would expose everything. My body might have been locked in place, but my mind was as sharp as ever. As he paced around the room, making phone calls and calculating his next move, I focused all my energy on my eyes. My eyelids felt heavy, like they were made of lead, but I concentrated. I could feel the twitch in my right eye, the smallest movement, and then I blinked. Once, twice. A quick, deliberate blink. The code. It was the smallest gesture, the smallest sign of life, but it was enough to send a shock through the room. I could hear the doctor's voice, uncertain now, tinged with suspicion. He leaned over me, shining the pen light into my eyes, trying to see if I was truly gone, if the coma was truly complete. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. Not ever. I held his gaze, my eyes locked onto his, forcing him to see the truth. I wasn't dead. Not yet. And that blink, that single small act of defiance, it was enough to make everything change. I had done it. I had given him the smallest clue, the smallest sign, and it was enough to make him doubt his own calculations. The doctor saw it. He couldn't deny it. The lie he had been told about me was crumbling in front of his eyes. My father, of course, was furious, but it wasn't the kind of anger you expect from a father. This wasn't the anger of someone who had just lost a child. No, this was the anger of a man who had been caught, who realized his plan might be falling apart. He snapped at the doctor, trying to brush it off, but I could see it in his eyes. The fear that he had lost control. That small moment of defiance, that blink, had set everything into motion. And I knew that the game was on. I had survived long enough to expose him. I had given him just enough rope to hang himself. All I had to do now was wait. And in the waiting, I would make sure he made the mistake that would cost him everything. The door creaked open again, and I could hear the faint shuffle of someone entering the room. It was Nathaniel, the lawyer. He wasn't here to comfort my father or offer condolences. No, Nathaniel was here for business. I could hear the familiar weight of his presence, the sharpness in his voice as he spoke to my father. The tension was thick in the air as they began to talk, their conversation low and clipped, like they were trying to keep their words between them. But I was still here, trapped in my silent cage, listening to everything. "Mr. Sterling," Nathaniel started, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. I heard the news. My father didn't even look up from his phone as he grunted. "Miraculous." He didn't sound relieved or happy. There was no real sense of gratitude, just a cold acknowledgement that his plans had been delayed. He had never cared about me, not in the way a father should. I was just a means to an end, a pawn in his game. He flicked his wrist dismissively, still focused on his phone. "She's still a vegetable," he muttered, voice flat. "Just a breathing one now. What do you want, Nathaniel? I thought you handled her taxes, not her medical charts." Nathaniel's voice didn't falter. "I do," he replied, but his tone shifted slightly, a subtle shift that hinted at something darker. "And that's actually why I'm here. We have a complication with the estate, a financial one. I need to review some files with her even if she cannot respond. Protocol." There it was. The cold truth. My father wasn't here to mourn me. He wasn't even here to say goodbye. He was here because my life had been reduced to a financial transaction. The insurance payout, the estate, the money that he needed to stay afloat. Nathaniel continued explaining the situation like it was just another business deal, but I could hear the edge in his voice. He was trying to keep his calm, but even he knew how dangerous my father was in his desperation. Privileged attorney-client confidentiality. Nathaniel added his words, careful and calculated. My father rolled his eyes, already growing tired of the conversation. But that didn't matter. Nathaniel had his attention. "I need the room," Nathaniel said, and with a wave of my father's hand, he was granted it. The door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the air felt heavier. My father was gone, but the conversation they were having, the plan they were formulating, was still with me. I focused on their voices, listening for any sign that Nathaniel was about to say something that would tip him off. I had to know what they were planning. "Clara's estate is a mess." Nathaniel started, his voice a little more serious now. I could almost picture him leaning over my bed, his face inches from mine. He was no longer just a lawyer. He was a man in the thick of a dangerous situation. The IRS froze everything: bank accounts, deeds, insurance policy. He paused, and I could hear him hail the sound, sharp and tense. They're auditing her estate. There it was, the truth of it. The IRS was blocking the payout. The money that my father had been counting on, the money he needed to clear his debts, was frozen, and he couldn't get to it. Not yet. But Nathaniel had a solution, a plan. He was already formulating his next move, something that would get my father exactly what he wanted. "If she dies while the audit is active," Nathaniel continued, "the government holds the funds in escrow for 2 years, maybe 3. My father's voice cut through the air. It was thick with panic. 2 years, he asked, disbelief lacing every word. I don't have 2 years. He was scared. Not of losing me, but of losing everything he had worked so hard to build. The house, the money, the connections. He was about to lose it all, and the thought of it drove him mad. "There's one loophole," Nathaniel said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He was enjoying this. "It's risky, but it's fast." He was baiting my father, dangling the solution in front of him, like a carrot to a hungry animal. "If a legal guardian steps in and signs an affidavit of assumption," Nathaniel explained slowly, "they basically tell the IRS, I'll take responsibility for resolving this audit." I could feel the shift in the room. My father was listening. Now his focus completely on Nathaniel. He didn't care about the risks. He didn't care about the details. All he cared about was getting to that money. "It lifts the freeze immediately," Nathaniel continued. "The insurance pays out within 24 hours. My father didn't even hesitate. His voice was quick, sharp. "I'll sign it," he said almost too eagerly. "Where is it?" Nathaniel was calm, measured. "You need to understand," he warned. "You'd be assuming liability for the estate standing. It's a formality mostly, but legally required." But my father wasn't listening. He didn't care. All he heard was the $2.5 million, the money that he desperately needed. The money that would solve all his problems. "I don't care about the formality." He snapped, his voice thick with greed. "I care about the $2.5 million sitting in limbo. Draw up the papers," he added, his tone final. Nathaniel didn't argue. He knew my father's desperation would drive him to do anything. The papers would be drawn up, and my father would sign them without a second thought. As I lay there, unable to move, unable to speak, I realized that Nathaniel was playing a dangerous game and my father was falling into the trap. They were both so blinded by their need for money, their greed, that they didn't even see the danger they were walking into. Nathaniel continued to speak, but it was all background noise now. My mind was working, calculating. I knew what was coming. My father was about to make a fatal mistake, and I would be there in the silence, waiting for the moment he did. The door creaked open once more, and I could hear my father's footsteps as he re-entered the room, his hurried pace betraying his anxious energy. He was on edge, his mind racing, consumed by the thought of the money that was just out of reach. I could hear the rustling of papers, the faint scrape of a pen against the table. His breath was shallow, quick. He was desperate, and it was that desperation that would make him slip. Nathaniel was already seated, the documents spread out in front of him. "Here we go," Nathaniel said, his voice steady, controlled. I could hear the barely contained satisfaction in his tone. He was playing this part well, the role of the calm professional lawyer, the man who had everything under control. But my father was losing it. "Just sign here, here, and here," Nathaniel instructed, his voice cool and rehearsed. I could hear the rustle of paper as my father picked up the pen. "This will lift the freeze on the accounts," Nathaniel continued, "and the payout will be processed immediately." My father didn't even bother reading the document. He had no interest in the fine print, no interest in the consequences. All he saw was the $2.5 million dangling in front of him like a carrot. His hand was shaking as he scribbled his name on the affidavit, unaware of the trap he was walking straight into. Each stroke of the pen, each line he signed was one step closer to his downfall. The papers weren't just about releasing the insurance payout. They were about giving Nathaniel and me a power over him that he couldn't comprehend. He was signing away more than just control over my estate. He was signing away his own future. Nathaniel's voice broke through the tension, smooth as ever. "Once this is filed, you'll be the legal guardian of the estate. All the assets will be yours to manage." I could hear my father's impatience as he signed, pushing the papers forward to Nathaniel. "Done." He snapped the words, carrying a mix of satisfaction and frustration. He had no idea what he had just done. His actions, driven by greed and panic, had sealed his fate. Nathaniel paused, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air. I could feel the shift in the room, the power slowly slipping away from my father. He had just handed over the reins to his own destruction, and he didn't even know it. As Nathaniel began to collect the papers, my father let out a long sigh of relief. "That's it," he asked, his voice a little too casual, as if he had just finished a simple transaction. "We're good now." He had no idea how wrong he was. No idea how his desperation had blinded him to the bigger picture. As Nathaniel moved to leave, I could feel my father's eyes on me. He wasn't looking at me with concern or even sorrow. No, he was looking at me with contempt, his cold eyes filled with disdain. He still thought I was a liability, a burden. His eyes flicked over to the life support machines, the beeping, the hissing, the noise that reminded him that I was still alive, still breathing, still holding on. It was a reminder that the money was still out of his grasp, and yet in his mind he was already counting the dollars, seeing the property deeds, and imagining the freedom the payout would bring. But he was wrong. He was so wrong. With each word, with each signature, my father had unwittingly walked deeper into a trap he couldn't escape. The document he had just signed, it wasn't just an affidavit of guardianship. It was the key to his financial ruin. Nathaniel had inflated the debts of the shell companies. He had backdated the liens. And now, with that single signature, my father was assuming full responsibility for an estate that was about to be buried under a mountain of tax debt fraud investigations and legal entanglements. His greed had made him blind. His desperation had made him careless. He thought the $2.5 million was the solution to his problems. He thought this was a simple transaction, sign the papers, get the money, solve everything. But the truth was far darker. The money was never his to begin with. The estate was a house of cards, and that signature was the wind that would bring it all crashing down. I could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air, the silence, thick and suffocating. My father was still pacing, still lost in his own thoughts, his mind already miles ahead of where he was standing. He didn't even notice Nathaniel slip the papers back into his briefcase, a small smirk playing at the edges of his lips. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Nathaniel said, his voice dripping with feigned gratitude. "You've made this much easier." My father barely acknowledged him. His mind was already calculating his next move, already thinking about how to spend the money he believed was just around the corner. Nathaniel turned to leave, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. The door clicked shut behind him, and in that moment, everything changed. I could feel the air in the room shift, the stillness replaced by the tension of what was to come. My father was walking away, completely unaware that his fate had already been sealed. His actions had set in motion a chain of events that would undo everything he had worked for, everything he had hoped to gain. And as I lay there, still paralyzed, still trapped in my own body, I realized something. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the one at the mercy of his decisions. I was the one who had orchestrated this. I had planned every move, every moment of silence, every calculated blink. And now, as my father walked away, he was already digging his own grave. The trap had been set and there was no way out. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the life support machines. My father's presence was almost suffocating, the weight of his arrogance and greed, filling the room as he stood over me. He thought I was still just a body, a lifeless thing that could be discarded for his gain. But he was wrong. I had been biding my time, waiting for this moment, the moment when he would make his fatal mistake. The plan I had set in motion, the quiet silence, the deliberate moves, had all led to this. My fingers twitched first. The smallest movement, but it was enough to send a rush of adrenaline through me. I could feel the cold metal of the emergency call button pressed against my palm. I had it hidden there, ready for this moment. Slowly, I lifted my hand, my fingers shaking with the effort. It was like everything had slowed down around me, the sound of my father's footsteps, the beeping of the machines, even my own heartbeat. The moment I had been waiting for was here. I pressed the button. The shrill sound of the alarm echoed through the room, breaking the silence like a gunshot. My father's head snapped around his face, pale with shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He thought I was gone, thought I was nothing more than a body waiting to be buried, but I wasn't. I was alive, and I had just triggered his downfall. Within seconds, the door burst open and Nathaniel stormed in, followed by a man holding a tablet. The look on my father's face was one of pure terror. The reality of his situation had just hit him. He couldn't escape. He couldn't talk his way out of this one. He had thought he had it all figured out, that the money would solve everything, that he could push me aside and take control of my life and my death. But now his empire was crumbling around him. The investigator held up the tablet, the footage of my father's crime on display. He tried to retreat, but it was too late. The police were already in the room, their presence sealing his fate. My father, the man who had manipulated, lied, and destroyed, was now the one who was going to be destroyed. As the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, I couldn't help but feel a rush of vindication. The man who had thought I was just a financial asset, who had treated me like a piece of property, was now going to face the consequences of his actions. As the police led him away, I closed my eyes, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It was over. I had turned the tables on him. I had used my expertise, my training to outsmart him at his own game. But there was a price. Freedom always has a price. For me, it had cost everything. It had cost the love I never received, the trust I never had, and the family I had always wanted. But it had also brought me something far more valuable: justice. As I lay there, finally free from his control, I knew I had done the right thing. The ledger had been balanced. And now it was time for me to start over. Clara's journey wasn't just about money, it was about something much deeper. It was about reclaiming her life from the people who thought they could control her, using their power and greed to make her invisible. But the emotional cost was immense. To fight for freedom, she had to let go of the idea of family, the hope for love, and the trust she once placed in those closest to her. And even then, freedom didn't come without its scars. But it did come with justice. Clara used her skills to expose the lies, the fraud, and the greed that had once held her captive. In the end, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And her story is a reminder that sometimes the fight for what's right requires us to lose something before we can gain everything. The price of freedom might be high, but the reward, it's worth every bit of sacrifice. If you've ever had to fight for your own freedom, for your own peace of mind, or for the truth, Clara's story might resonate with you. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Have you ever been in a battle for your own life in one way or another? And if you believe in the power of personal accountability, justice, and empowerment, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going. This journey might be over for Clara, but for all of us, it's only just beginning.